Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining today for our digital workshop on how to nail your next distance interview. We know that a lot of employers now are using distance interviewing techniques amid COVID-19 just to lower the amount of interaction, physical interaction between interviewers and job seekers to make it a little bit safer for everyone. So more and more employers are using phone interviews and video conferencing tools to interview their next potential employee. And it is very different from how we interview face to face. So we're going to be talking about some of those differences today and how you can still knock the socks off your interviewer and get that job offer. So to talk a little bit about the different things we'll be discussing today, first, we will discuss preparing for the interview because when you go in for an in-person interview, the employer has already set ideal conditions, making sure that you won't be disturbed, it's quiet, distraction-free, and those are the kinds of conditions you have to create in your own home when you're doing a distance interview. Next, we will talk about what to do during the interview, how it's different from face-to-face interviewing over a video conferencing tool like Zoom or on the phone. Then we will go over some unexpected complications because while you're trying to create ideal conditions, there are always things that could come up, and how do you handle those and what are the most common instances? So we'll be discussing that. And then lastly, we'll be going over some frequently asked questions that a lot of job seekers ask us at Chautauqua Works and the answers to those questions. So let's dig right in. Preparing for the interview. So you have the interview, you get off the phone with that employer, you read the email and respond that sounds great, you're all excited. What's the first thing you do? So you want to go over some general interview preparation. You want to do some research on the employer so that you sound like you know what you're talking about when discussing their programs and services, and you get a good idea of the company culture. Make sure that you practice ahead of time. So that means just going over very common interview questions, and we will be posting on our Facebook page, the most common interview questions and how to answer them appropriately. It will also be emailed to you along with the link to this video if you're viewing it at home without Facebook or YouTube. Align your answers with the job description. So when you're looking through the job description, if it's talking a lot about how they want a team player, incorporate that into your answers. If they're talking about, how they want you to have initiative, show that you have initiative in how you answer the questions that they're asking you. And lastly, prepare good questions for the employer. And we'll talk more about what a good question is later on. So you've done your general interview prep. What do you want to do the day before? So first, confirm the details of the interview. If it's going to be video conferencing, make sure that you know the meeting ID and that you understand what video conferencing tool they are going to be using. If you are doing a phone interview, make sure you know the phone number so that if they're calling you, you know it's them when you answer the phone, and make sure that you know if you're supposed to be calling them or if they're going to be calling you, because that's always awkward once the time rolls around. You're like, I haven't gotten a call. Oh shoot, was I supposed to call them? So confirm that ahead of time. It's really not a hindrance for the employer for you to check the details the day before. Test your programs and devices, the video conferencing tools, make sure that you have minutes on your phone and that your phone network is working. Pick out the appropriate clothes, which we'll also be talking about later. And yes, even if you're doing a phone interview, still dress professionally. It's still important for your mindset, and make sure that you're talking in a professional tone. When we're wearing sweatpants and a t-shirt, we tend to get more comfortable and sometimes even forget who we're talking to. So still dress professionally no matter what. And lastly, decide on your location. You want it to be quiet and private and distraction-free. And this is especially important for video locations. If you're doing a video interview, you want a clean and tidy background. Like if you look behind me, the blank wall, right? I don't have any personal identifying objects. You don't want to have anything up that you wouldn't have in your office space. Make sure you're sitting in a regular chair, not a sofa, not a bed, not a lounge chair, but a regular chair, preferably one that doesn't go higher than your shoulders. Make sure that your head is positioned in the middle of the screen. If it's like too low, right, it can make it just doesn't look as professional. And if it's too high, it's awkward, right? You want your head position to be right in the middle. You want to make sure that your computer is on a flat surface. So it's not on your lap, right? So if you move a little bit, it shakes. You want to make sure that it's flat. You want to make sure the lighting is good. You don't want a light behind you because that'll create, a glare. It'll wash out your face and it's very distracting. And you want to make sure your audio works ahead of time. So do every kind of test you can on your computer. We've learned this the hard way at Chautauqua Works with our first workshops, with the audio not working. So you really want to make sure that it works well before you get to the interview day. So we're going to play a little Who Gets the Job. So try and figure out if you think this person would make a good first impression on employer based on the clothes they're wearing and the conditions that they're in. So photo number 1. This one, is pretty good. She's dressed right. You can tell the computer is probably on a desk or a table of some sort, and it's a professional background. Looks good. In photo number 2, while she's dressed well and, forgetting about how she's doing this because you want to be sitting up straight when you're doing your interview, she's not sitting alone. And even if, your roommates or your significant other promises to be quiet and not disturb you, it's still distracting. Whether, you think it is or not, anything that they do, if they move their arm a certain way, it can pull your eyes away from the camera. So in this photo, she is dressed very well. She's in a professional setting, but we really don't recommend sitting in front of a window like that for your interview because, like I said, it can create that glare and you don't want anything distracting them from you and your amazingness and the great answers you're given to them about how you would thrive in this position. This is also a very good one. A lot of people ask, are the headphones okay? And most employers, they say yes, as long as the audio is good. It doesn't look unprofessional if you have the headphones in. Just make sure that there's a microphone there and it's not too loud and you have it hooked up with your computer, that it understands that headphones are plugged in. So just make sure all of that is working properly and you should be fine. Now, this is another really popular question, like, oh, I love doing video conferencing interviews because I don't have to dress up in the bottom half. I only have to dress up in the top. We still don't recommend that. Like we talked about, unexpected complications can arise that would make you need to stand up. And of course, in that instance, you're not going to think, oh no, I'm not wearing the proper, pants. And you stand up and it's embarrassing. Just for that 20 minutes or 30 minutes, put on professional pants. It'll be worth it. This one, we would say no, because she's sitting on a sofa. You can tell the laptop's on her lap, but also look at what she's wearing. Now, this might be fine, okay for an in-person interview, but we do not recommend wearing all bright colors for your video interview. It can create a glare. It can be distracting. Depending on what your background is, you could just look like a floating head. So just make sure that you work that out ahead of time. When you're practicing setting up, the day before, what the location, put on what you're planning on wearing and make sure it works with the background. And also, whether you're doing it on phone or on video, you want to practice. Not just the questions, which you should have been reviewing, for a while now, but practice talking to the camera. You can probably tell while we're going through this that it's very easy to tell if I'm looking at the presentation on my computer or if I'm looking at myself on the screen or if I'm distracted by something off in the corner of the room. It's really obvious if I'm not looking at the video camera. And so you want to practice talking to the camera lens. For me, I put a little a little sticky with a smiley face to remind me to look at the camera, so it's a little bit easier, a little bit more personal, I guess. And for your phone interview, you might be like, oh, I talk on the phone all the time. I don't need to practice talking on the phone. But being on an interview is different. You're answering questions about yourself without using any body language. So you have to add more inflection in your voice. And it's really best to just practice. Just have a friend call you, ask you some interview prep questions, and practice talking on the phone. You can prepare some notes as well, especially for phone interviews, but we want you to be cautious when doing this because it can be very obvious if someone is reading off pre-written notes on how to answer certain questions on the phone. So bullets at most, maybe the job description, your resume, the questions you want to ask them at the end. And if you're doing a video interview, it's even more important to not have extensive notes because you can only put what fits on your screen. Maybe a little post note over here with the questions, maybe you write something you want to make sure that you mention during the interview about yourself. So just be cautious. And lastly, and you should be doing this for whenever you're job searching, is to set a professional voicemail. Because sometimes it can be your first impression on the employer when they call you. So this is a good example of one. Hi, you've reached Selena Crick. I'm sorry I missed your call. Please leave me a detailed message and I'll return your call as soon as possible. Thank you. Make sure you say it slowly. Make sure there's no noise in the background, other people talking, traffic, whatever it is. Make sure it sounds professional. So Zoom is probably the most popular platform right now for video interviews with employers. So this is just a quick tutorial about how to set one up. It's very easy. You just go to this link and it'll list out all the different kinds of downloads that you use for different devices. So make sure you know how to use it ahead of time. I would even recommend doing this 2 days before or 3 days before if you're really unfamiliar with it. If you don't know about computers that well, really get as much practice as you can using it and know how to adjust the audio if you need to, quickly and easily, and just make sure that you know how to use it properly. So you're at the day, right? How do you prepare in the morning before your interview? First, make sure your devices are charged. Be extra careful and have it, if you're using a computer, have it plugged in, while you're interviewing. Have a clock in sight so you know how long, it's been going so you can time things appropriately. Turn off all other devices. The last thing you want is your phone ringing, during your video interview or, your home assistant going off. Unplug it. Make sure nothing else is going to disturb your interview. Make sure you're alone and won't be disturbed by other people. Have a glass of water ready, in case, you start choking a little bit. You don't want to have to get up and get a glass of water. That's awkward. Just have it there. If you're the one reaching out, we recommend to call about a minute early. And if they're reaching out, make sure you're ready at least 5 minutes prior. I mean, think about it like if you go for an actual in-person interview, you'd probably get there about 15 minutes early, right? Same kind of thing for phone interview. Be prepared. Don't be, washing the dishes 2 minutes before your interview time and then, because it's just make sure that you're prepared, you're seated, you're ready. So now you're at the actual interview. The first impression is crucial in all interviews. So if you're answering the phone, make sure you say who it is. Hello, this is Selena, or you've reached Selena, or hi, Selena here. Just make sure that you do that so that the interviewer knows that they've reached the right person. And remember, for video or phone interviews, enthusiasm is like a strong handshake. Thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedule to talk with me today. I've been really looking forward to this meeting, or I've been really looking forward to this call. I can't wait to talk to you about this position and, and go on from there. Feel free to engage in some small talk and be genuine about it. Ask them how they're doing. They might be like, oh, fine, how are you? And say, I'm really hoping that spring gets here soon. I can't believe that it's still snowing outside. Keep it light, keep it positive, but It helps to break the ice before you get into the actual questions. And also ask if the interviewer can hear you well. Is the volume too loud? Is it too soft? And make sure it's perfect before you start. They'll really appreciate it, and it's okay to take the extra couple of seconds to do that. So when you're on your phone interview, you want to speak differently than you would in an in-person interview. Make sure that you're still smiling, because you can tell when someone's smiling and talking versus not smiling and talking. It just adds that bit of lift so an employer can tell. Show passion through your language. Be expressive, enunciate, don't speak too quickly. And because if you speak too fast, it sounds like you're nervous and then they can't understand you very well. In an in-person interview, we say that, cracking a joke, that's fine as long as it's appropriate, obviously, but we really don't recommend that on phone interviews, because without the, facial expressions, they can't always tell if it's a joke or not. So it's better to just stay away from trying to be funny. Don't talk too much. We have a tendency to rattle on, especially on the phone, because there's just dead silence on the other side and you can't see their facial expressions. Say as much as you think you need to, and then you can always ask if they would like more details. Make sure that you pause before answering so that you don't accidentally interrupt them. But if you do interrupt them, stop talking immediately and don't start again. Wait until they start, because you don't want to do that. Go ahead. Try to avoid that if you can. It's not the worst thing in the world, but it definitely, makes the situation a little bit more difficult. And make sure that your answers aren't, short, non-descriptive. Like we said, show passion through your language and really feel like you can be expressive with your voice. So when you're doing a phone interview, the environment is still important. Make sure that if you're going to be using notes, that they're already out on the table or on the couch or wherever you're doing it, so that you don't hear, the paper ruffling while you're doing the interview. You can stand if you want for a phone interview. It helps with projection, makes you sound more confident. Just make sure it's not distracting to you. And if you sit, just make sure you sit up straight. And we really don't advise using a speakerphone or Bluetooth unless it's extremely good quality, because it can be hard for the interviewer to understand you and hear you if you're using a speakerphone. And actually, we recommend that if you have a cell phone and a landline, give them your landline number, because that, will have great connection, and it's very easy to understand people. So let's say you're doing a video interview. It is very similar to doing an in-person one. Just make sure that you're being professional. We've talked to some employers in the area about, their video interviews, and they say maybe 25% of the people they interview actually act the way they would if they were in their office and not in their home. So make sure you're just professional, and that'll already put you, ahead of the pack. Keep eye contact with the camera. We talked about that before. That's really important. It's how you keep eye contact with your interviewer, because they are on the other side of that lens. Avoid too much body motion, because if you're moving your hands around a lot, or you're moving, I don't know why you'd be moving your head, but if you're moving your body around a lot, it can be difficult for the camera to focus, and it might create some shorts. So, just make sure that you're not moving around too much. Make sure you're sitting up straight. And don't fidget a lot, with your hair. If you're looking in the camera and you're like, oh no, I've got, I don't know, something on my face, they can still see you. It's not like you're looking in a mirror. So make sure that you're comfortable ahead of time so that you're not fidgeting at all during your interview, or, uncrossing and crossing your legs or anything like that. And don't be afraid to be expressive. Even though we're saying, not too much body motion, don't feel like you have to sit like this and the entire time you're doing the interview. You can be relaxed and nod your head, use your hands if you want, just not too much. It's a balance. At the end of the interview, make sure you're respecting the time limit. Ask for their email for the follow-up thank you email if you don't have it already, and end with a call to action. This was such a pleasure, and I'm really looking forward to next steps and meeting you in person. So say those kinds of things at the end of the interview. All right, now we're going to go into unexpected complications and how to handle them as a professional. Because, of course, sometimes you can only do so much to create ideal conditions, right? If you have an unexpected complication, make sure it's out of your control. And this can even be a plus for you because if you handle it professionally and are able to adapt quickly and successfully, it shows how you handle yourself under pressure and that you can be counted on as an employee. So this isn't the worst thing that can happen to you. So probably the most common one is if you miss the phone call, if they call too early, or you forgot to put your ringer on, or maybe you had to run to the bathroom really quick, or whatever it is. It's okay. This is the most common one, and we're only human. So first step first, calm down before you call them back so you don't sound like you're panicking, and think about what you're going to say. When you call them, apologize quickly and briefly. And then if it's been a while, if you're very late for some reason, ask them if they would like to reschedule because you're still very interested in the interview, in the position, and would like to have a full interview. If the connection or reception is bad, again, this is out of your control. First things first, tell them that you can't hear them, address the problem. If it's a video interview, turn off all other Wi-Fi-based devices because that can sometimes, create a lag for your computer. Tell them you can call them back on a different device, or if your computer isn't working, ask if you can do a phone interview. That's okay, or reschedule if necessary. If you can't figure out the problem or you need to call Spectrum or whatever the reason, say you're still very interested in the position and you don't want this keeping you from being able to do your interview. If there's an interruption or distraction, apologize and address it. Handle it promptly if you can, and reschedule if the distraction is prolonged. So for an example, if there's construction outside, right? Not much you can do about that. Couldn't have planned it ahead of time. Ask to reschedule. If there's loud music from your neighbors though, maybe that's something you can handle pretty quickly. Just be like, excuse me, I'm just going to talk to them for a second, get them to lower the music. I will be right back. But just make sure that it's fast. If it turns into a fight or an issue of some sort, don't stand out there for 5 or 10 minutes trying to convince them to turn the music down. Come back and try and reschedule. So now we're going to go through some potential scenarios. And while we're going through these, think, is this situation within their control and are they handling it professionally? So let's say you get a call back to an employer and say, I'm so sorry, I missed your call. I was driving at the time and just got back home. The grocery store was crazy. Now, we wouldn't recommend this because, that is within your control. We're not supposed to be leaving the house right now anyway. So let's just play it safe and don't go anywhere the day of your interview. If it's an emergency, let the employer know ahead of time before the interview time. Let them know something has come up and ask them to reschedule if necessary. If it's an emergency, they will understand. Employers are people too. I'm so sorry, I'm late. My computer was acting up and then I couldn't find my charging cord and then my internet stopped working and I had to call Spectrum to reconnect it. And of course I was on hold for forever, but everything is working now. Now, while this is an understandable issue, it is way too long-winded. It makes it sound like an excuse where you could just say, I'm sorry I was late. I had some technical difficulties. They have been resolved, but I understand. Would you like to reschedule, if it's been prolonged or anything like that? I'm so sorry for missing your call. I had to handle an unexpected family emergency. I understand I'm late, but do you still have time available to talk? This is perfect. To the point, brief, understandable. Could you excuse me for a moment? My children are fighting over the television and they only listen to me. Now, while this can happen, really try to avoid it the best you can. Because of course, you can't control children, especially if they're younger, but it's still is a little bit unprofessional. So really try to avoid this if you can. It's not the worst thing in the world if it happens, but it depends on the employer's perspective if they will understand or not. So it's better to just take all the precautions you can. Think of it this way. Would you bring your kids to an interview? If the babysitter doesn't pull through, you don't have anyone to watch them, you would just reschedule, right? And you can still do this in this circumstance if you need to reschedule. Would you excuse me for a second? My maintenance man is here to fix an emergency building issue. I just need to let him in and I'll be right back. This is fine. If it's an emergency, you can't control it, this is fine. As long, tell them at the beginning of the interview that you might get interrupted for an emergency, for something in the building or anything like that, just like you would a typical interview. If you know an emergency might happen, just let them know ahead of time. All right, and on to some frequently asked questions. The first being, what kinds of questions do I ask the employer? Now, a lot of people will move right towards, asking about their benefits or the hours or the pay. But these are all questions that can be held off until they offer you the position. I would only ask those if you already have a job offer from someone else and you want to compare them, but really try and avoid it if you can. It's much better to ask questions that relate to the job description. So if you're reading through the job description or in your research for the employer, you didn't understand something or you thought something was interesting and want further information, ask a question about that, about a program or a service or, the populations they work with, the clients, whatever it is, just make sure that it's related to the actual job that you want. What if I don't know the answer to a question? It is always better to ask them to repeat it to give you more time or to say, that's a really good question. Let me think about it for a second. Than to say, I don't know. So really feel like you can take the time to think about a good answer. You might feel more rushed over the phone because of the silence, thing, but it's really better to take the time to think about it. What if I don't hear or don't understand a question? Ask them to repeat it or ask for clarification. Restate the question to make sure you understood it properly. What if I'm not good on the phone or on video camera? We have all been there, right? And it's, an excuse a lot of us use. But like everything else, it just takes some practice. Practice ahead of time. And if there's actually like a severe issue you have with talking on the phone or on the phone, like a speech impediment, just address it at the beginning of the interview. Say, you might notice throughout this that I have a slight stutter, but I want to promise you that this has never kept me from doing my job effectively. And just, keep going with that. So if you have any questions about what we talked about, please feel free to reach me at this information. You can give me, shoot me an email, give me a phone call, or call our general office to ask me any questions you might have and practice your skills if you have an interview coming up. And all of our career specialists can do this. If you just call the office, you can be referred to anyone who might be able to help you practice your interview skills. But if you're going to take anything from this presentation, make sure that you test your devices ahead of time. You know how they work. Create ideal conditions in your home. Practice ahead of time. Stay professional no matter what. Show your passion. And if something goes wrong, stay calm. Thank you very much for joining us. And if you have any questions, feel free to contact our office.